Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for Food Sovereignty in the Desert, Reclaiming Traditional O'odham Foodways. This evening, Dr. Ramon-Sauberan will be talking about the traditional foodways of the Tohono O'odham and how climate change is impacting these foodways. This event is part of our Climate Conversation series and hosted by Arizona Humanities. Arizona Humanities is a state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. We support humanities-based public programs across the state in partnership with other cultural and educational organizations. This program is made possible in part by support from the National Endowment for the Humanities. And I just want to talk a little bit about tonight's format before I introduce our speaker, but we'll have a presentation followed by a Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat, which should be to the right of your screen. You will need a Google account to participate in the chat, but if you don't have a Google account, you can use a Google form, which is linked in the description below, and I'll also drop it in the chat momentarily. But that's where you can ask any questions you have for Dr. Ramon-Sauberan, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight. Dr. Jacelle Ramon-Sauberan is Tohono O'odham and from the San Javier District. She serves as faculty in the Tohono O'odham Studies program at Tohono O'odham Community College. Dr. Ramon-Sauberan also serves as a Tohono O'odham Nation Education Development Liaison for Kitt Peak National Observatory. She earned her PhD in American Indian Studies with a minor in journalism at the University of Arizona in May 2023. Her research focused on the history of land and water in the San Javier District, and she has written for news publications across the U.S., including Indian Country Today. We are really excited to have Dr. Ramon-Sauberan back on today, and now I will turn it over to her.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Skutkuringak Wusich, Anyab Dugi, Dr. Jacelle Ramon-Sauberan Chapwak Amachid. So good evening, everyone. It is really great to be here with you all and to continue sharing. Like we had just mentioned right now, I was here before, and so it's really great to be back again and to continue discussion talking about tonight food sovereignty. And so I'll go ahead and jump into it. This is just a slide just to add a little bit more about myself. You know, I wear many different hats. I do all sorts of different things, but also too, I am a very proud mom. This is a picture of me and my daughter Lydia when I graduated, and I'm also a very proud auntie. And so I also just wanted to share too before we get started is that all the information that I'm sharing with you tonight is from me. I don't speak for the whole Tohono O'odham Nation, but just in what's the information and knowledge is what's been passed down from generation to generation. And then also too, I come from a really, really great community, the San Javier District, and through my dissertation research, doing interviews with community members and relatives, and just so compiling all of that and sharing with you tonight. So I wanted to share a little bit of background, especially if you don't know too much about the Tohono O'odham Nation. And so, I always like to just start a little bit with history, and then we'll dive into our topic for tonight. So here is a map that shows our ancestral land, so prior to contact, and it's the orange dotted. And we are very fortunate that we have never been removed from our ancestral lands, as you can see on this map here. And so today, our reservation, which makes it's 4 parcels, you can see it in the orange, solid orange on the map. And so, also too, another big part of our history is having the U.S.-Mexico border that divided our ancestral lands, and you can see that on the map as well, the dotted gray. And then the blue dots are some of the communities, O'odham communities that are in Mexico. And, also too, talking about, food, talking about history, language is very much part of our identity and who we are. And everything is just really interconnected, and I also say interwoven in a way. So also talking about the name for Tucson, and originally, and in O'odham it's Jukshon, and also to the name Arizona, and looking at Arishon and how, during contact, how the traditional names got lost over time. And, for the Tohono O'odham Nation, we are really striving to share our language, continue our language. And, I try my best as a language learner to incorporate it as much as possible. And so having that shared with you all on the screen, and Jukshan meaning, the spring or the area at the base of Black Mountain, in reference to a mountain in Tucson. And then also looking at, the word Arishon, and, small base, and just these meanings that are tied to these different areas. And then additionally, also just sharing a bit more history. In 1937 is when we became federally recognized. And at that time, we were called Papago. And that was actually a name that the Jesuit priest, Father Eusebio Quino, gave to us. And so it's derived from a Spanish word that means bean eater. And I know that may sound funny, but it ties to our traditional foods, and one of them being tepary beans. And so, that's still something that we grow and harvest and eat today. And so that's where that name first came from. But in 1986, we were able to change our name back to Tohono O'odham. And then also, we worked on revising our constitution, and then also adopting a new structure of government at that time. And so today there are 36,000 enrolled tribal members, with about 2,000 that are in Mexico. And as I mentioned, we have, on our main part of our parcel, there's 74 miles of the U.S.-Mexico border that crosses through, and there's 4 land bases. They're all separate, and they were all designated by executive order at different times, but all together it makes up 2.8 million acres, and is all in reference to size, closest to the size of the state of Connecticut. And just to give you an idea, and this, I'm setting this up to share when we get more into the food, of just, looking at how big our reservation is, and then when it comes to, accessibility to food. And so, our capital of the reservation is Sells, and depending on, driving from Tucson, it's an hour plus, to get to that. And then additionally, there's other communities that are even further out. And so looking at the main part of the parcel, it also incorporates Kitt Peak National Observatory, and looking at the boundaries, it begins south of Casa Grande and encompass parts of Pinal, Pima, and Maricopa counties, and before continuing to Mexico, as we've been talking about here. And then also too, I really love this artwork by Tohono O'odham tribal member Jennifer Wan, and we have our storytelling that happens during the winter time. And I know this spring, it's, our weather has been kind of all over the place. It's been hot, it's been cold, but typically our wintertime stories start when you feel that first cold night, and then ends right about when you think things start to warm up again. The weather starts to warm up, and it's not a particular date. It's just, again, you just have that feeling, and so we are at the end of our storytelling. But Coyote has a lot to do with our different stories that tie to food. Also too, we have stories that talk about how the tepary bean was given to us, and so I really like her artwork, and I always try to incorporate it and highlight it whenever I can. And so in continuing on here, this is kind of a zoomed in picture map here of what you saw a couple slides ago where it was just that solid orange. And so this shows all of our districts. And so if you think of the Tohono O'odham Nation, just like the U.S. and it's its own country, within the U.S. we have states, and within the Tohono O'odham Nation we have districts, which would be equivalent, the same. And then within our districts there are, it varies from district to district, but there's communities and villages, and those are just like cities and towns. And so these are all the different names, some of which, do tie to one of our food systems, which is farming. And, and then it's just also to naming what is in that particular area, as you can see here, or even tying to animals as well. And so, as we dive into talking about food sovereignty, it's important to know how we once lived traditionally, and looking at how we lived along the rivers. Gila River, Salt River. For my community, it's the Santa Cruz River, and then also to others living semi-nomadic, and meaning they have 2 homes, and that all had to do with farming. It had to do with harvesting. It had to do, with the seasons. And then also those that were, hunters and gatherers, or, even nomadic, and they just were roamed, and really, again, just kind of went where the food was, or, being able to have shelter. And we really had to be connected in understanding our landscape and understanding the terrain, and understanding, even when you drive nowadays from Tucson to Flagstaff, and it's a 4-hour drive, and how vast the landscape changes from being in the Sonoran Desert to forestry, right? And so and so that's thinking heading south to north. But for talking about the Tohono O'odham Nation, even driving from west to east, east to west, and looking at how the landscape changes. And so for me, where I come from in Santa Vera, people have different opinions on this, but my grandma always told me that, we are river and desert people. And we actually were and are, living in this very unique area, because we've had, our sacred mountain, and then we have the Santa Cruz River, and we've always situated ourselves really nicely, in between the two, and having that. And plus we have the Santa Vera del Bac Mission, and but again, also too, we've been farmers for time immemorial, but also to knowing to where to go for our wild harvests, right? And then for those that did hunt, knowing, where say the mountains, for example, to be able to go and hunt, say, deer. And so also, looking at, how the different areas, again, are semi-nomadic versus, that nomadic, and, how that just looks, so if you're ever driving, on Highway 86, and, whether you're going to the observatory, or if you're heading, to Puerto Penasco, or, Ajo, or anywhere, really take time to look out the window, and see just how things do change. And that does play a factor, and for us O'odham, we were made from the ground, the dirt. So we have, this internal connection to the land, to the plants, to the animals, to the seasons, to everything, and that's what I mentioned at the very beginning of having that knowledge and recognizing, right, that how things are interwoven, interconnected here. And I also like to mention too that we do have different groups of O'odham. So prior to contact, we were all just O'odham, which translates to people. But after contact and, interaction with Father Kino and others, then we started to have different groups. And in part was because Father Kino didn't think that the O'odham living in, say, Santa Vera could be related to the O'odham that were living along the Salt River, Gila River. They thought it was just too far apart that we couldn't possibly be related, but we were. And so, but we have different names now, but today we call each other our sister tribes. And so you have Tohono O'odham, which means desert people, Akamet O'odham, Gila River, or translates to river people, Ankh Akamet O'odham, Salt River people, and then Akchin O'odham, mouth of the wash people. And Akchin relates to one of our traditional, or does relate to our traditional farming method that takes place in the summertime with monsoon rains. And then we have Hiachit O'odham, and that translates to sand people. So the four that I just mentioned are federally recognized, but Hiachit O'odham are not, but they are working, and there's some really great individuals that are Hiachit O'odham that are striving and working to become federally recognized. And this is a photo of my great-great-grandmother, and she's making a basket, but she, her and my great-great-grandfather actually had a ranch, and they had all sorts of different animals, and they would actually go by horseback to downtown Tucson, where they would trade and sell eggs, goat cheese, milk at one point in time. But I was just like highlighting because of just how, I grew up hearing these stories about my relatives and just, how we lived. And, there are times that we were assimilated, but for the most part, we were adapting. We had to learn how to survive as time changed, but still holding on to our himathug, our way of life, and our foods, which are a big part of that. And so tying into our himathug, and talking about foods, and we have these different elements, which I'm really grateful that the Tohono O'odham Community College, when different parts of the college were beginning to be created, and developing curriculums and different things, we definitely wanted to make sure himathug was every part of the college, and it is today. And so looking at these elements, and you definitely see the harvesting, the traditional foods, hunting, tying into the language elements, earth, air, fire, wind. And then another part to this too is also our medicinal plants. And I've always been taught that our food is medicine to us. And I always remind my nieces and my daughter, when we go and harvest in the summertime, bahitach, the saguaro fruit, that this is medicine, this is nutrition to your body. And then also too, we have songs that tie to our different harvests, and whether it's a wild harvest or if you're harvesting something you've planted, right? And again, just how things are connected, and just how we as O'odham, we as people, have our own definitions of it, based on how we are raised, who we come from, our communities, and definitely for me, having the land, the environment, the seasons be very important, because I come from a family of farmers. And so this also ties to our calendar, and looking at the summertime, and that's when we have our new year. And so there's different parts to it. It's not like we say, yay, happy new year, and we throw some confetti. There's so much more to it, and there's different parts that are incorporated when it comes to our celebration. It's going out and harvesting, being with family. It's a time of renewal. When you go out, and my family goes to Sonoran National Park, Tucson Mountain District, which is on the west end of Tucson, to harvest. And you give thanks, you give blessings to the hahash and the saguaros, that are providing the fruit, and they are our ancestors, and they were people once upon a time. And so having that, and then, you know, when you're out there harvesting as well, and we use a swirl rib that we call guiput to you know, get the fruit, but you're also pulling the clouds down to welcome those monsoon rains. So you're harvesting, you're spending time with family, you know, you're giving that respect to you know, what you're doing, the plants, in this case, you know, the saguaros, and then, you know, you spend time making either syrup, jam, or wine out of the fruit. And then, you know, there is ceremonies held in different areas to, you know, celebrate our new year and what we harvested. And again, to call those rains to come, because they're so important here in the desert, right, to have that. And I always get asked this too, of when we do harvest, you know, how much, you know, like quantity wise does that look like? And so I went out a couple times last harvesting season, and so we roughly got about 30.5 cups of the fruit, which is raw, and put it in a, you know, bucket, took it home. And that actually, after, you know, straining and boiling, the process we go through to make the syrup, it came out to 5 cups. And so I've been trying to keep track more and more so people understand, you know, but it's not about that for us. It's not about, you know, like we're going to go out and, you know, we need to collect this much fruit to make this many cups, right? For us, it's more so you go out and you collect, and when you've collected enough, you just know. You know, it's a mindset that's been taught to us that, you know, you don't take everything because there's others that need it too. And so, you know, always having that little reminder in the back of your head with any of our, you know, harvesting that we do. And, you know, another part to this too, when we talk about climate change, is, you know, the discussion around what's happening with saguaros. And, you know, there's some additional resources that we'll share with you. There was a really great report from Sonoran National Park that talked about that, and looking at, you know, what has transpired over time, you know, in terms of climate change relating to saguaros. And for me, I got interviewed some years ago about it, and, you know, we were in the middle of the pandemic, and I really just saw it as a way, you know, this is in a way for me, my spirituality of how the saguaros were feeling what we were going through. They felt those hard times through the pandemic. They felt that loss. They felt that hardship, you know, and we just had to keep pushing through, you know. And of course, you know, me and my family, we kept monitoring, you know, the saguaros, and, you know, just talking to them and offering prayer and singing, you know, because all of that's really healing. And, you know, and I was talking to another person too, and they were saying they're going to be okay. And then he's like, yeah, they are, you know. And so having those conversations with others is really important. And, you know, and I remember too, when the pandemic happened, the first thing my nieces were like, are we going to be able to go and harvest, you know? And that was something, you know, that kind of makes me smile, because that was just on their mind of, you know, yeah, there's this, you know, world, you know, event happening, but they're thinking about our culture. You know, they didn't want to stop. And so we continue to harvest, you know, and went out by ourselves, whereas usually we have other people that go with us. But yeah, so again, you know, paying attention to our landscape. And I think sometimes we forget to. You know, I know definitely during times where, you know, I'm sitting at the computer, and then next thing I know, I'm like, what time is it? You know, and so, you know, that's my reminder to you all, is to go outside, you know, especially now we're, you know, heading into spring, and spring's here, and just all the beautiful flowers, you know, and that ties to our calendar and the descriptions of the calendar and how it talks about, you know, and it's descriptive of what's happening during these months, right? And in April, Wamashat, which means yellow moon or yellow month, because of the wildflowers. You know, my partner and I, as we were driving up, we're like, wow, look at all these wildflowers along I-10, you know, as we were coming up and, you know, to Phoenix to be here today. And so, you know, again, just, you know, how things are connected, you know. And another part to this too is, you know, within Sonoran National Park, before it was even Sonoran National Park, you know, that was one way that our food sovereignty was challenged, because the park didn't know that we had been going there for time immemorial to harvest, you know. And my great-great-grandparents, they would go out by horse and wagon, and they would stay out there for months at a time, if you know where Gilbert Ray Campground is. And there was other O'odhams that would do that too, because they would go and they'd harvest geodum, cholla buds, and then, you know, would stay to harvest the bite, that's the saguaro fruit. And so, you know, when they came, you know, when they came to create that and designate it as the park, you know, there was a bit of a controversy, because they told us we couldn't do that. And then, you know, having allies on our side and said, you can't do that. And Stuart Udall said, you know, can't take that away. You have, this is something you have to, you know, understand that this will hurt their traditional ways. It will hurt their himathug. And so, you know, through his help made it possible so that, you know, we are still able to harvest there today. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute here. And so these are some of my nieces highlighting us picking saguaro fruit. So if you've never seen it before, I always like to show these photos. And that I mentioned the saguaro rib tool that we use to push or pull down the fruit. Sometimes the hahash and the saguaros really, like to give you a challenge. But that's how it looks when the peel is open. And then as we leave the peels usually at the base of the saguaro, so then that way that can go back into the roots and make sure that the coming years the saguaros have really good have really good nutrients. But it's also, you know, for the animals, those that can't get up to the crowns of the arms, right, to be able to harvest. And so this is just a short little video of my niece, and she's cutting open. So the part that she's using to cut it open is actually the flower. When the flower first blooms, the white flower, and then it dries up and it looks like a stem. And so you can use it to cut it open, and then that's her putting it into our bucket. And so, as I mentioned, some of our foods, and I've talked a little bit about our food systems. You know, we farm. Auction farming is one of our main traditional ways of farming. But in Sanibel, we had the river, right? And so we were able to, my great-great-grandfather and great-grandfather had farms, and they were able to use the canal systems of our ancestors, the Tohono O'odham, and divert water from the Santa Cruz River into the farm fields. You know, and whereas other parts of the nation didn't have a river, right? And so that's where they relied on that summer monsoon rains, or anytime there was a real heavy rain, but mostly in the summertime. And then also harvesting wild foods, as I just mentioned briefly, and then hunting was another one as well. But for the most part, you know, we were vegetarians, but you know, sometimes when you would have that well village in the wintertime, you know, and you were able to go and or new areas, I should say, to go and hunt deer or small game, you know, people would. But going back up to the top here, so some of the foods that we grow: tepary beans, and then squash, corn, watermelon. We call O'odham watermelon, and it's yellow and it's delicious. And then, but after contact, you know, and meeting with Father Aquino, you know, we began harvesting wheat, and we were introduced to horses and cows. And so that's really where the ranch life was adopted by us. But also, too, you know, there's other foods as well, you know, fruit trees. And it was really interesting because at that time, for O'odham, we really started incorporating what was being introduced to us, but we still have our traditional foods. So we found this balance between harvesting, planting and harvesting non-traditional, and then our traditional. And that is still practiced today through the Santa Vera Cooperative Farm. And I'll talk a little bit more about the farm in a minute. And also too, I think, just other, not necessarily food, but looking at tools and other items that we would use, today, right? And so thinking about these metal tools, and whereas before, we were just making our own out of the desert. And I want to mention from the late Bernard Siqueiros, who unfortunately passed recently, and he's an O'odham elder. He mentions in one of his presentations that he was talking with a friend, and they were talking and conversating about how the desert is our grocery store, is our hardware store, is our pharmacy. And I just, that really stuck with me. And it's true, and I think, again, we need those reminders from time to time that, especially if you're congested, or, there are ways that you can go out, your front door and get a creosote bush, to help alleviate that, right? These holistic natural remedies. But I just wanted to mention that because I always like, whenever I share that recorded lecture with my students, I just really always like that part. And then, wild foods that we harvest, as I mentioned, the sorrel fruit, cholla buds, mesquite beans, and then different wild greens such as spinach. And then other plants that we do harvest for basket making and also our pottery is yucca, beargrass, devil's claw, banana root, and of course, the clay to make the pottery. And there's different colors of the clay as well. And so, and this is just some of many, right? But definitely, there's different areas that you have to go in order to, farm, to go and do wild harvesting. For example, for the stories I grew up hearing and, within my community and my relatives of that, yes, we farmed in Santa Vera and we still farm today, but then we had to know where these little pockets of area were, like Sonoran National Park today, to go and harvest. And from my great-great-grandparents to my daughter, 6 generations of us going to that area to be able to harvest sorrel fruit. And that's, the one big one that we do together, because of the new year, but also to a time to just, reflect and have that, time to just be together, right? And it's really important to have that and spend time with family. And so, and I want to mention, this is Juanita Hill, and in Sonoran National Park, it's her family that that still have a sorrel fruit camp that is there. And she had, it was very foundational in our food systems and our food knowledge, and sharing, and again making sure that ran that camp for as long as she could until she passed it down. And so here are some really cool photos that I collected through my dissertation research. And in this bottom photo, the man in the dark shirt that's looking down is my great grandfather, and this is his farm field in Santa Vera in the late 1800s. And he's sharing because people wanted to know, how are you so successful growing these crops in the desert? And I think that's another thing too, is that there's this misconception from time to time that it's so hot here, nothing grows here, and it's the complete opposite. Our creator Itoy put us here and gave us all of these plants, animals, taught us how to survive in the desert, and also, knowing where to find water, right? And so, But of course, that changed over time. And there's a really great book. It's called From Itoi's Garden, Tohono O'odham Food Traditions. And it was put together by Tohono O'odham Community Action and a few others. And there's some elders that are no longer here that were able to be part of this, like Francis Manuel and Danny Lopez, to share their knowledge. And I really like this because it does highlight what happened over time, after contact and just within the American Indian history eras of, boarding schools, going to serve in war, also to just, just these different times of when, we started to feel that loss of our himatag, which incorporates our food, and definitely by having our men and, also women serve in the war, that really hurt us, because then you have generational loss of information being passed down when it comes to our food systems. And so, that's just one of many ways, but then also to, looking at just how even, looking at boarding schools, as I mentioned, and that change in diet when, of course there's so many different stories, some good, some bad when it comes to boarding schools, but definitely your lifestyle being uprooted and your diet being uprooted, and you getting and having to eat foods that you've never had before, right? And then you just got to think about time changing with fast food, restaurants, and looking at the accessibility to foods, and where we always had to go out and find, and know where to harvest, and also to when we were farming, paying attention to the night sky, so we knew, and being in tune with that. But then, it became where we could just go to the grocery store. We could go to, again, McDonald's, Burger King, wherever. And so that really changed things. But also too, when the government started to give us food, commodity food boxes, and giving us, foods that, again, our body just didn't know how to process those unhealthy foods, and having fry bread come from those, and even though it's delicious, it's unhealthy, and so that really affected us and our bodies. And today there's roughly between 50 to 60% of Tohono O'odham tribal members that have type 2 diabetes because of these different I guess you could say periods in time that affected us. And so, but where do we go from there? Like what, and definitely there are some really amazing things that, my tribe is doing. And so, and there's been these setbacks, but it's never taken us away from really pushing forward to still continue on, right? And especially when, we were growing, thousands of pounds of tepary beans to just very under 100 pounds, right? And so, but one of those setbacks, as I mentioned, was with Saguaro National Park, and, Stuart Udall at that time, being an ally and helping us. And, I always think of what if he hadn't helped us and we were not able to go and harvest in that area anymore, like the impact that it would have on us. But I'm really glad that, today we have a really good relationship. I feel like we do. And we do sign a permit. The Tohono O'odham Nation does sign a permit with Sonoran National Park. It used to be annually, but now it's every 5 years. And here are some really awesome photos, from over the years that I've collected and people have shared with me of, the different camps that were in what is now the boundary of the park. And so here's Juanita again. And so Juanita passed it on to her relative, her granddaughter, Stella Tucker. And then when Stella passed away in 2019, her daughter, Tanisha Tucker, and niece, Maria Francisco, took over. And so again, like, instead of, looking at this of like, oh, there's this feeling, between the park, like they don't want us here, we worked it out. And so, we're able to, as tribal members, go and harvest there. Tanisha and Maria do wonderful, with bringing people out, whether you are a tribal member or not, but to continue on, for Tanisha, her mom, and then, her great grandma Juanita, and making sure that knowledge continues to be shared. And I've worked with, Tanisha and Maria too, and brought some of my students out over the years to be able to harvest different wild foods, mainly the bai that's just saguaro fruit. But, it's really important, that, we find resolutions to push forward and keep on, right? And so through different efforts of people, it's where it is today, And then Tina Andrews is one of those people. And we actually now have an O'odham ranger within Sonoran National Park, Jacelle Ramon, who's doing really awesome things. And, I've been there working with them as well. And we have educator retreats now is something that we really, is new. And we started just to really, be together and be in good company and, build upon these relationships. And so, another part to this too, though, and it's a big part of my research that I did for my dissertation, was looking at what transpired and happened in Sanavir. And so again, also too, it's, kind of had almost, these setbacks and just these things that happened over time, but we didn't ever stop fighting as a community, to continue on what we were put here to be, which is caretakers of the land and to protect our land and our water. And so I put this timeline together, that highlighted, what transpired within, like major events that transpired over time within my community, and there's some really great things that came from, what we went through, one of which is the Sanavir Cooperative Farm, and super proud of the organization and, what they're doing. And, but of course, we had loss of land because of reservations, but also to the General Allotment Act that happened, and Sanavir is the only parcel that went through that because we were the only parcel that was a reservation parcel, I should say, that was created at that time. And then, we had loss of our water, the Santa Cruz River being depleted by all these outside sources around us, where we had been able to maintain that water source. And so that hurt. But then we went through a lawsuit, the Southern Arizona Water Rights Settlement Act, to push back and hold those accountable and say, that's not okay what you did, because then we didn't have that and we couldn't farm like we once did. And farming became something that was of the past. And so, but through that Southern Arizona Water Rights Settlement Act, SORSA for short, we were able to have Central Arizona Project Water come to Tucson, come to the farm and have that. But of course, talking about climate change, talking about, Colorado River, and, paying attention to, again, our water, our seasons, and what if there comes a day and a time where we don't have that water source, right, where the farm relies 100% on it, and it's helped us other ways in our community. But those are types of conversations we're having, and it's really great that, the efforts and the things that my community is doing to do that. And, in my last chapter of my dissertation research was starting to explore this. Okay, I'm like, here is the foundation, we have this document, but then where do we go from here? And, in my community, I say, we did this, we put this document together, and because you can't, really talk about what's happening in the present or plan for the future if you don't know what happened in the past, right? And so we were able to put this living document together that lays that out, so that now, staff at the co-op farm are able to say, okay, where do we go from here? How do we plan? How do we look forward? And so today, the co-op farm, they have about 1,000 acres, and 800 of those acres are being farmed on. And how that came to be was actually, I like to refer to it as decolonizing what had happened to us, and I'm sure you've heard that term before for other things, but that's really what we started to do. We were introduced to individualism, which was foreign to us when the General Allotment Act happened. We were essentially lines drawn in the dirt, paperwork drawn up to separate us. But then when we wanted to push back, on what had happened, and we wanted to do something about it, is what I'm really getting at. We also made sure that we pieced the land back together. And so that's how you have the farm today. You have those that are landowners, or, we call them allottees, piece that land back together. So it's the community, it's the community, it's the staff, it's also, the landowners that are working together to bring the farming back, but also be able to continue our traditional ecological knowledge, which is amazing to see. And so the staff that are there, they're doing awesome. This is a quote from Amy Wan. She's the farm administrator manager that's there. She says, "Today the farm is revitalizing traditional foodways. The members are growing a few thousand pounds of temporary beans each year, encouraging kids to become the next generation of farmers, and optimizing seed saving efforts to ensure there's enough to meet the nation's demands in the future." So, it's amazing to have that, and really, my focus too is on our youth, because they're our future leaders. They need to, know this information, understand it, especially not only know it, but also why it's important, and definitely wanting to leave them, feeling okay, right? As those of us that are older, and saying, here's everything I've done, now you take it, and I've seen that happen within my family, with my research, where my Auntie Julie Ramon Pearson, she was getting ready to retire, and she is now retired, but she wanted to be able to pass on the knowledge and the information. And so I stepped up into that. And, it's part of the reason I'm here today is because of what she shared. And then also to my mom, Janice Ramon, and just, my community as a whole. And so, another part to this too, the other efforts, as I mentioned, the book from Iitoi's Garden that was put together largely by the Tohono O'odham Community Action. Unfortunately, that organization isn't active, but they were at the forefront of really helping, as I mentioned on, the other sides of just these things that happened over time that really hurt us. But they stepped up and said, okay, well, how do we revitalize this? How do we reintroduce this? How, and for over 20 years, that's what they did within the community. And a lot of the individuals that were a part of that organization are off in other places doing amazing things, carrying on that knowledge and sharing that knowledge. There are a number of folks that are at the Santa Vera Co-op farm that were part of, in short, we call it TOCA. And it's just amazing to see, because they really just set this foundation, right? And even though, again, like I said, they're not active, that knowledge is continued on through these individuals into these other organizations. And, Aho CSA, but Aho Center for Sustainable Agriculture is another example of that, where there were folks that were there for quite some time. They're now moved on to another organization, right? But, doing different things there. And the folks that are there right now, they're hosting farmers markets, where it gives tribal members a chance to come and taste traditional foods, but also learn. I actually got a recipe from them when I went last year, and it was really awesome. They're like, yeah, we have these free recipes. And so I was able to use one of their recipes a few weeks ago, actually, and I made, so in O'odham we call it saguaro fruit syrup sitor, and so I made sitor barbecue sauce. and I put it on chicken, and I did it with one of my students. It was amazing. So, taking and having this contemporary traditional dish. But it was because of a recipe I picked up from Ajo CSA at one of their farmers markets. Mission Garden too. I sit on the board for Mission Garden, and Megan Lopez, she is O'odham, and there's others too that are they in collaboration with Megan, that have a monthly workshop on traditional O'odham agriculture. They have some other events coming up as well, but just the efforts that they're leading there and pulling in different tribal members, it's a really great place. And then within my district, my community, our natural resources department, is helping those conversations I mentioned on climate change, and even starting off real with the real simple with the basics of what is climate change, and having I think we're coming up on our 4th workshop, and I was able to present at one of the workshops talking about resiliency, and what that means, and that timeline I showed, and looking at it, that's really shows an example of resiliency, among my people in my community. But they're working on, and in collaboration with the University of Arizona, this climate change workshop, and it's been really great to have that and talk about these important topics, and build upon them and have these questions, proposed to us, and us being like, and then being able to get in these groups and talk with others, and it's been really great. And so with myself at an individual level, I am working with a team on a documentary series right now called Making Arizona, and I was the first to be interviewed for that. So it's actually taking essentially my dissertation research, which is very complex and complicated at times and a lot of information, and taking a chunk and a piece of that and putting it into this documentary series. And so we're making our way to share that in different cities. And so we had one in Tucson, and then we'll be in Chandler next, and then Flagstaff and Yuma. But that's really great to have also those bigger conversations with others too, but really talking about, again, what my community did, what happened and what we did over time, and then where we're at now, because within the Santa Fe district boundaries, we actually do have one of our aquifers that's flowing again, and that's a true blessing, and I really think it's because of all the hard work from my community, and that we continue to do, and then also teaching. So I actually teach the Tohono O'odham Food Systems course at Tohono O'odham Community College, and then also within the University of Arizona Social and Behavioral Sciences College, they have community classrooms, and so teaching and sharing as well, is really awesome. And I have an independent study for my food systems course this semester, and with my one student, that's who we've been meeting, and we made mesquite flour muffins one week. Then I mentioned that barbecue sauce, which is really awesome, and getting together some more before the semester's over to continue cooking and introducing these foods to her that I want her to, I'm like, you don't have to change your whole diet, but there's ways to take traditional foods like geodum or choya buds and put it in a salad, a green salad, or just even thinking about like the chicken, how we baked chicken and then had that glaze on there. So again, just having this chance to really sit down and talk and have a discussion and, cook, bake, has been really awesome experience, and having that. But, again, just talking about food sovereignty and just what we've held on to, and, of course things have happened over time, but there, again, are just these amazing efforts in organizations, and also individuals as well that we're leading to make sure that our traditional ecological knowledge continues on, and wanting to also be examples for others, maybe other tribal nations and communities that are looking to do stuff, that's something that we're doing as well. And people are always like, can we come visit the co-op farm? Can, this, that? Of course you can, right? And I always like to be a resource too. So, my contact information is up here, so you can reach out anytime, and I'm happy to share. And like I mentioned, we will have additional resources that I put together that, you can definitely download, save, read, pass on to others, as you're learning and, what your interests are in our topic that we were talking about tonight. So with that, the Hugay, thank you, and ready for questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ramon-Sauberan. That was a wonderful talk, and I love all the photos you included in your presentation. They were beautiful. I'd like to invite our virtual audience to add any questions you have into the chat or in the Google form. So we'll be taking questions now. Our first question in one of the Google forms is, do you have any recommended reading to go along with some of the stuff that you talked about today? And I know this is something we also talked about as well.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the documents I am going to share with you all is my dissertation research paper. Others, like we mentioned from Itoi's Garden, that you can purchase online. Sharing the Desert by Winston P. Erickson is also a really good book that we use at Tohono O'odham Community College within our courses. But I can definitely recommend others too, because unfortunately some of the books that are really good, they're no longer in print, but I will share those that are in print that you can purchase and definitely, get on Amazon or Google Books.
Great. And, I was really interested in this movement to cook more with the traditional foods, and I was wondering if you could talk more about, what the present day movements are to incorporate more of those traditional foods and contemporary cookings. Like, are there restaurants that are opening up and doing that? Are there, I guess, what is the interest like in your community for that?
Sure. So Tohono O'odham Community Action at one point in time did have a restaurant that they opened called Desert Rain Cafe, and it was in Cells, which is our capital, as I mentioned at the very beginning of our presentation, and it was wonderful. It was really great, and it was really geared towards having the traditional foods reintroduced into our diets as tribal members, but then also it was a lot of contemporary traditional, in that of having, like, for example, my favorite that I got every time I went there when it was open was prickly pear glazed chicken. And then also others that were passing through, if they're going to Organ Pipe, National Monument, Ajo, or, heading into Mexico, they would stop there. But, unfortunately, for, different reasons, they had to close, and had hopes to open it, a full restaurant again, but it just never happened. So I think now more than ever, there's, again, these individual levels or organization levels that are doing that to have wild harvest workshops. Senator Co-op Farm, pre-pandemic did have those, and I believe they're starting to start those back up again. Some are, for just tribal members, but then also they do open them up to the public as well. And then myself, that was something, being home through the pandemic and having more time, right? Because at that time, I was a full-time PhD candidate. I was, looking to work full-time, being a full-time mom. So all of these things, and never had time, it was more like what's easiest, fastest, but really having a chance to start diving into those foods of, I had them, but I didn't know how to make them, and so learning these different recipes in that book from Itoi's Garden is really great because it has recipes in it. Some are traditional recipes where also to incorporating other more contemporary or from other, ethnicities and kind of combining this, really great dish. And so one of the things I really wanted to do with my food systems class was to cook, and I haven't had that opportunity because the class was virtual. And so with this independent study, the student, is local and close by in Tucson. So I said, let's cook, let's bake, let's get together, and who doesn't enjoy, having conversation, discussion over some delicious food, and and some of those recipes are real simple, that she can, take back and share with her family. And, for me, I'm like, wow, I'm going to start incorporating this more and more, and so that's, I think, and also Ajo CSA, different workshops and things they're doing too, to again share that knowledge and have those different taste testings for people when they do at the farmers market and whatnot. So I really hope that we can have a restaurant like that again that has a lot of those traditional foods, incorporated, in dishes. But we'll see. Right now, also too, the Santa Vera Co-op Farm does do catering. So they also, that's another way too, on top of the wild harvest workshops, where you can ask them to cater it. I have some relatives that work there, and shout out to Phyllis Valenzuela and all the amazing work that she's doing there, and the dishes she makes, and it's what's grown there, it's what they harvest there, and they put into these very delicious meals. And so they have a website, and they're on social media too, so you can follow and explore their website as well.
Thank you. And another question from Andrea: are you also addressing the nutritional benefits of consuming traditional foods?
Yes, definitely. And so, yeah, again, that's like another layer to this too, right? Because if you really, think about it visually of, just our food sovereignty, and looking at, it's one thing to know what our foods are, know the difference between traditional foods, and we have contemporary traditional, which are, as I mentioned earlier, like fry bread, or even pinto beans versus tepary beans, which are traditional for us. But yeah, and it's really amazing. Again, like I'm gonna reference the book again from Ito's Garden, because in that book it talks about those nutritional facts too, and so it's like, well, why is this healthy, right? Because you're like, oh, these are traditional foods, and but again, looking at that, and in one of the sections for the choya buds, it talks about how a handful of choya buds, cooked choya buds, is equivalent to a glass of milk, and really putting it into context where people could understand. And even thinking about that long ago, of we didn't eat the quantity of food that we eat today, because the foods, our traditional foods, really had, the health benefits, but also too could sustain us. And even, I learned some years ago with our saguaro fruit syrup, how that can help you from becoming dehydrated. So when our tribal members were working in the farm fields between, Phoenix and Tucson, then they would go and take a spoonful of it to help them, throughout the day. But again, it's like you start really diving into and thinking about that. And that book, again, just lays out those nutritional facts, and you're just like, whoa, I get it now, like, seeing it. And of course, also too, like for the saguaro fruit syrup, or even the jam, if you have diabetes, that's a really good alternative to have that on your pancakes, on your toast, and because when we do cook, cook those, that we don't add anything to the syrup, the jam, the wine. It's just other than water, but meaning like, other ingredients, that's nothing else is added to it. People are like, when they taste it, like, really? It's just water? It's like, yeah, that's how tasty and healthy it is.
Wonderful, thank you. That's so interesting to hear all about the nutritional benefits of these and the different uses for the food. How are the seeds harvested, and are the seeds passed down through generations?
So that's when it comes to farming, yes, there are seeds that different families, like for example, at the Santa Vera Co-op Farm, the first farm manager and very knowledgeable elder, Clifford Pablo, his seeds from his family, are still being utilized at the farm, and so that's really amazing to have. And then others too. And there are some people that are on the farm staff that are keeping document of that, seed sovereignty. And it wasn't until, a handful of years ago that I really started diving into that and getting to know more about that, and even seeing what my tribe, has been doing. And again, more of like this individual effort of documenting that and understanding, where these different seeds came from, right? And so there is, again, those individuals, I wouldn't really say necessarily like a movement, but just this need to track and know where our seeds are coming from, hold on to our seeds, right? And, continue to take care of them, because they are living spirits. And that's how we see them. They're living beings. And so, it's really great. I check in from time to time with those individuals. And, it was really great when we were working together and having meetings, and I was just listening and hearing them. And I actually had that document shared with me, and I was really, amazed at how many pages and and the efforts that have been done and continue to be done in my community when it comes to seed sovereignty. And as for wild harvesting, though, it's interesting because the seeds from, say, the saguaro fruit, you actually can save those and you can eat them raw, and they're really good for your digestive system. And even if, from time to time you just kind of need a reset, those are, you can, pop a few in your mouth and chew them, and they'll help. And so again, just looking at, how resourceful the saguaro really is, and everything that it provides, right? And so, but then also too, like with the seeds and stuff, when they fall on the ground, if they get left, then they just go back right into the roots of the saguaro, and, they get that nutrients again to be able to harvest, many flowers and then the fruit.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. I know we're kind of well past 7 now, but I was wondering, for kind of a wrap-up question, when we're
Sure.
thinking about climate change,
Mm-hmm.
are there lessons maybe that non-native communities can learn from your community, and that traditional ecological knowledge that we can incorporate?
Sure, definitely. That's a really good question. And I think, the biggest thing is just to be mindful, right, of our surroundings. And, definitely here in the desert, our water consumption, and being mindful too of, little things of not leaving the sink running, but also too, I really encourage people to come to events. So thank you all for coming here today to listen to me talk and share, but take advantage of other opportunities to hear what people have to say, and that self-education is really important, right? To and to further understand, who we are as O'odham, and also to just, I think another part to it too is just, come out, come to a workshop if you're able to. And, I know this is online, but again, also get out in the communities, and see and taste the foods, and, ask questions. It's okay, and that's why I also say I'm always a resource too, for folks that, want to learn and, want to hear about more events, because, all of that is really important. And, I think also too, just, being on different, I know many of us, most of us are on social media. So following these different, like the Santa River Co-op Farm, these different organizations, to just be in the know-how of what's going on and what they're doing, and, and sharing that with others. I think it's a really big thing, and really good first couple steps, as, you're learning and educating, or even, maybe if you are Native, and what your tribe is doing, and we can cultural exchange and sharing with each other. And, I'm always happy to collaborate and be a partner, partnerships with folks too. Those relationships are very important too in all of this as well. So.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ramon-Sauberan. That was It was a great Q&A session, really wonderful responses. We did get a lot of questions about some of the books and resources you were mentioning, so we'll send out links in an email to everyone who registered with those books and readings mentioned, so you will have that as a resource. But thank you so much everyone for tuning in tonight, and thank you again for joining us.